Welcome to HortTube, where we talk all things gardening. My name is Jim Putnam, and this is part 3 in my How to Grow Blueberries series. Today I'm going to show you how to container plant blueberries. Blueberries actually make fantastic container plants. We definitely have to think about what materials we're using in the container because they are acid-loving plants. There's a lot of reasons why you'd end up with blueberries in containers if you're in an area of the country that doesn't have soil that is acidic enough for blueberries, or maybe you're a renter or you're in an apartment, whatever. They make great container plants. You need to think about the size and type of container you're using though. I'm gonna put the blueberry plant in this 15-gallon container today. This is just a black nursery container. This would be about an equivalent 16-inch pot if you were buying a decorative container. Just make sure it has drainage holes in the bottom. We need to make sure that the water can find a way out of the bottom when it gets too wet, when we get a thunderstorm or something like that. That's probably not adequate, that 15-gallon container. Over, maybe we could keep it in this container about 2 years. This plant right here is in a 2-gallon pot. It's going to go in that 15-gallon container. We can leave it in there this year and maybe next year. From there, it's probably best that it ends up in about a 25-gallon container. And if you were buying a decorative pot, this is about a 24-inch wide container. A whiskey barrel would work perfect for this as long as it has a drainage hole in the bottom of it, or one of those half barrels is probably the equivalent 25-gallon pot. So when we're container planting a blueberry, you're always going to hear peat moss, peat moss, peat moss. And that's great because it does have the low pH that we're looking for. But one issue with peat moss is a blueberry plant is still a woody shrub, and woody shrubs like to dry out a little bit between rains and between waterings, and peat can really hold a lot of water, almost too much water at times. So I like to cut the peat moss a little bit with some pine bark soil conditioner, and I'm actually going to start my container off with a little bit of soil conditioner right at the bottom, and I'm going to do it right up to the edge of these drainage holes here, which will give a place for extra water to find its way to that bark and then out of these drainage holes. Another option for that would be to buy a small bag of gravel and maybe put an inch or two of gravel right at the base of the pot. So I'm going to start with about 2 inches of this pine bark soil conditioner right at the bottom of this container, and I'm just going to get up to where I've covered the drainage holes that are in the side of it. And that's going to be perfect. It's up about that much on the edge of this container. From there, I'm going to go ahead and put some of this peat moss in. And this peat moss is in a bale. It's very compressed. As I put it into the container, I'm going to want to break it up just a little bit. And we'll fill this up to about 3/4 of the way. Okay, that's about 3/4 of the way up. So we've got our bark on the bottom, then we've got a layer of peat that's probably about 12 inches deep. I'm gonna come back and put some bark on the top of this so that when I plant my blueberry, it's gonna mix in and incorporate into that peat moss to create a little bit of drainage. The thing you'll see when you pull a blueberry plant out of the container, this one is not particularly root bound. It's only been planted in this container since the fall. It's got a couple weeds on the top we're definitely going to want to get rid of, and a little bit of pine straw and some leaves that have fallen on it. But this one is not particularly root bound. Blueberries have very fibrous root systems, and most of the time when you take one out, you're going to really need to go all the way around it and really loosen up the edge of that root ball. And from the bottom, I'll typically just peel away like this and make sure I rough all of it up. It does have one side on it here where the roots are very tight, and I will rough that up a little bit. One advantage to using a decorative pot rather than this black nursery pot is blueberry roots are a little bit sensitive to heat. So if this black pot ends up in the full sun all day, it will probably damage the roots on the side of the pot that's getting the most sun. And occasionally I'll come out and rotate a pot around like that to then get the roots to fill in on the other side. Not a lot of depth to this one. This pot wasn't very full, and so I'm going to work that bark into that peat moss a little bit. Then I'm going to dig a small hole. I'm almost setting this on top of what I had done so far. and then I'm gonna fill up to the edge of it. At the end of this, I don't wanna cover anything that wasn't covered when I took it out of the container. None of this wood that's above this soil line should be covered up at all. So I'm gonna mix some peat, and then some bark, then some peat, then some bark, until I get this right up to the top edge. And then I'm gonna tamp it down around it, and then we'll need to do some watering on it. One thing about this peat moss, I told you, holding that much water, it comes dry in this bale, and it's gonna take several times watering it to get it wet. You need to get the container where it's gonna go before you start watering it, because the weight of this thing is gonna triple probably. We can pack it down quite a bit. And I'll just keep going back and forth until I have it right up to the top. That's great. I don't have anything covered. I've got it sitting right flush to the top. I'm gonna take a little bit of this pine bark and just put a little bit right around the top. This is gonna help control any weeds that might try to come up in this. Right now, this pot is very light because, like I say, that bark is dry and this peat is dry. When I water it, it will be very, very heavy. So that's really the basics of this. If I'm using the peat moss and the pine bark, I know it's acid enough. I don't really have to worry about lowering the pH after that. You can soil test these. You can buy one of the inexpensive pH testers. Box stores have them, all the garden centers have them, and actually check this and make sure the pH is in between 4.5 and 5 or 5.5. If it's not low enough, you can add some sulfur, a small amount of sulfur, to the container at the time, and then maybe check it a couple weeks later and see if that's lowered it enough. The last step I'm gonna take before I move this to where it's going is I'm gonna put some Hollytone on it, which has some sulfur in it, and it's a great slow release fertilizer for acid loving plants. I'm gonna use probably about 3/4 of a cup. Okay, so that's basically it. You can see the blueberries have formed on this variety already, and they'll continue to grow throughout the season. Here's your 15-gallon container. I've got the peat and pine bark mix, a little bit of bark on the top, and that will help the top inch or so of soil dry out and help control weeds up in the upper part of the soil here. They have a harder time gaining hold if the top inch of soil is never wet. And then, like I told you here, I don't have anything covered that wasn't covered in the container. I still see the top of the root ball from where it was originally in the other container. This 15-gallon container, like I say, I'll definitely get this season and probably next season out of it. Initially, I'm gonna water it very heavily until the water runs out of the bottom. It'll take me probably 2, maybe even 3 waterings to actually saturate this peat moss. Then I'm gonna let it dry out over time. And the way container plants work is I probably won't have to water it again for at least a week. And over time, that amount of time is going to go less and less and less until I'm probably watering it daily a month from now. And then once it becomes really frustrating next year, I would probably take it out of this 15-gallon container and move it over to the equivalent 25-gallon container, whatever that is. And then I think you could probably permanently leave it in that container. Occasionally with container plants, I'll actually go in and dig some space out, maybe 2 or 3 spots around the container, and go down pretty deep and add some fresh soil to it. And I'll be taking out some roots at that time, and probably will do a little bit of damage to it that way. But having that fresh soil in it occasionally will definitely help with the growth of these plants. Thank you for watching my video on container planting blueberries. If it was helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. Also, next Thursday, I'll be back showing you how to actually plant them in the ground. I have clay soils in my yard, so I'm actually going to be mounding them up above that clay. It's probably important to some others that may have clay-based soils as well. And I'll also show you how to plant them in sandier soils, which is really quite easy. So again, thanks for watching.